Hi everyone, today we're continuing on with our study of the Spanish Armada and we're looking at the threat that the Armada posed as well as the course of action that it would sail. So we'll go ahead and pause the video in a moment to get down our title, date, learning objective, and starter. The starter question is asking us, what were some of the problems affecting Elizabeth between 1559 and 1588? So go ahead, pause the video, get down your title, date, LO, and starter, and answer as many of the problems Elizabeth was facing between this time period. Great, so some of the problems affecting Elizabeth after the year 1559 and on to 1588 could include the issue of poverty. We know that Elizabeth worked tirelessly with the Elizabethan Poor Laws to try to help those who could not help themselves. And in part, this would help to solve the issue of vagrancy. We know that disease was spreading, crime rates were going up. With farmers changing their farming methods, many people left the countryside and moved to towns and villages in search of work. The religious settlement was an overarching issue that started in 1559 and never really ended, even up until the end of Elizabeth's reign in 1603. And she was constantly plagued by the problems caused by recusants who were refusing to go to the new church. The excommunication from the church, also known as the papal bull. The issue of marriage and succession. Who will actually lead England after Elizabeth? Because let's face it, she didn't have a successor who was named or any children who would take over for her. Parliament and MPs were always causing Elizabeth trouble. Many people in Parliament were Puritans who already opposed Elizabeth, and individuals such as Peter Wentworth or Anthony Cope went so far as to speak out against her in Parliament and serve time in the Tower of London for doing so. And the war in the Netherlands. This could also be another problem affecting her. And lastly, the Spanish Armada, of course, the unit that we're talking about now. So we know at this point that Philip dreamt up the Spanish Armada in 1586, and he was set sail in 1588. And Philip was so convinced that they would defeat the English, they actually leaked details about the size of the Armada. So here's what Philip told the English. He said, we have 130 galleon ships, really large ships that were well equipped with cannons. We've got 30,000 men. We've got 1,900 cannons. He even went so far as to tell them how many cannonballs they had. Plenty of food and plenty of drink for a long voyage and time away. And the Duke of Parma, the most feared military leader in Europe, had 17,000 experienced soldiers waiting in the Netherlands. Now, your question to answer in your books is to write down, why would Spain leak this information? Why would they tell England about the size of the Armada? So go ahead and pause the video, make a few key point notes, and then write down the question and answer why Spain would tell England about the size of the Armada. When you're finished, hit play and we'll go up with the answer together. So why would Spain tell England about the size of the Armada? Well, some reasons may include intimidation. And Philip didn't really want to go to war. Wars are expensive, people die. He wanted to avoid the fight entirely. And if the English were afraid of those 130 galleons, those 123,000 cannonballs, those 17,000 soldiers in the Netherlands, England might surrender from the start. And this would mean Spain could avoid a costly battle, and they could crush the Protestant uprising in the Netherlands instead. If the English surrendered, the Spanish could easily march into the country and restore Catholicism as the official faith there. So what sort of problems is Elizabeth going to encounter when trying to defend England? So how would she actually know that the Spanish ships were coming? This is long before the days of radar or even high quality telescopes. So how is Elizabeth going to know the Spanish are on their way? Where are the Spanish actually going to land their ships? How big at the time was England's army? And lastly, what was England's greatest strength? So how do they know the Spanish are coming? Well, the English developed a really clever system of what they called beacons. These were very tall metal baskets that were filled with wood, and that wood was kept dry consistently. If it rained, new wood would then replace it. And the moment that a ship was spotted in the English Channel, a beacon would be lit. And beacons were positioned every few miles along the coastline. And there'd always be people manning the beacons. The moment one beacon was lit, the next would be lit as well, and this would signify that the Armada was approaching. Where were the Spanish actually going to land? Well, we've learned in previous lessons they were planning to land at a place called Margate in Kent. But the English didn't know this. They believed if they made it ashore, the battle could then be over before it even started. So the English were very keen to use their beacons to avoid the Spanish landing on English soil. At the time, England's army wasn't particularly the largest in Europe. They managed to raise a force of about 20,000 men, and we know the Duke of Parma had 17,000 just to himself. Most of the English soldiers were quite poorly trained and not very well equipped. It wasn't uncommon for these English soldiers to have things like a shovel, a spade, or a rake to use as a weapon. Elizabeth decided to split the army into three. As she wasn't sure where the Spanish Armada would land, she sent some to the north, some to Kent, and some to Essex. This would not be enough soldiers in any location to defeat the army of the Duke of Parma. England's greatest strength was probably their ships and Sir Francis Drake. He was a very experienced sailor and a complete asset to England. He did a lot of work for Elizabeth in the Spanish Main, raiding ships and getting a lot of money for the English economy. The English ships were smaller, they were lighter, and they were more agile than the Spanish galleons, which meant that they could maneuver and attack at a much faster rate. Now, the course of the Armada. If we look to the map on the right-hand side, we can see the port of La Coruna. You might remember the name of La Coruna from a place where the Spanish Armada needed to stop to take on repairs after it was damaged in some storms in the spring of 1588. So the plan is for the Armada to sail into the English Channel, defeat the English, and then march on land. But that's not going to be the actual course the Armada takes. There will be some issues they encounter along the way, and the Armada will actually have to sail around the coast of Scotland and Ireland and return at nearly half the size it set off. The first big problem for the Spanish happened on the 6th of August 1588 when the Duke of Medina Sidonia was positioned at Calais, ready for Parma soldiers to board his ships to cross the English Channel so the invasion could begin. But Parma was nowhere to be seen. He was over a week late because he was busy fighting Dutch Protestants in the Netherlands. In your books, write down the following question. What does this mean for England? England's been provided with a rare opportunity and they need to be able to exploit it. So go ahead in your books now and write the question, what does this mean for England? And do your best to answer it. Hit play when you're ready. So the fact that the Duke of Parma is late is quite advantageous to the English. They now have the upper hand and they can strike while the Spanish are sitting ducks and waiting. The Spanish, however, had their ships arranged in a crescent formation, which made it nearly impossible for the English to attack. If we look at our image on the right-hand side, we can see this half-moon shape, and that's what we call a crescent. Now, this means that you can't hit the sides of the ship with cannonballs. If we look at a ship head-on, it's actually quite narrow, and we can see at the bottom of the screen, this is a front profile of a ship. A ship from the side, however, is quite broad, and there's plenty of space to be able to hit with those cannonballs. So in this crescent formation, it was very difficult for the English to successfully attack and sink any of the Spanish ships. So how would the English attack? They know they can't just fire cannonballs at the Spanish galleons. So they came up with an alternative plan. They used something called fire ships. And what they would do is take small boats, pack them with tar, gunpowder, light them ablaze, and send them floating down the English Channel. These unmanned ships would then come near the Spanish galleons and blow up, potentially sinking the Spanish ships. Wanting to avoid any kind of trouble, the Spanish galleons quickly cut their anchors and scattered in all directions. Without any phones or way to text each other, the Spanish ships started sailing in all directions, and most of them had to sail north as that's the way the winds were going. So now the Spanish are on the run. In your books, write down what problems you might think the Spanish are going to face as they retreat. Once you've written a few ideas down, go ahead and hit play and we'll take them up together. So as Spain's retreating, there are a few problems that they may encounter. So they faced a lot of problems with the weather. On the 9th of August, the winds shifted and they could only sail north, as the graphic on the right-hand side shows. And this means they have to now sail around the northern coast of Scotland. But there's a problem. They didn't bring any maps with them. They don't know if there's any obstructions under the water, or they don't know where is safe to sail and where is not. And this means that many Spanish ships were actually lost and shipwrecked. Any Spanish soldiers who made it ashore after a shipwreck were often beaten up or they were killed. Now we can see at the bottom the result of the Armada was quite a telling English victory. England lost 0 ships in the Armada, as opposed to Spain, who lost 51. 5 of them were sunk or captured by the English. And out of all the individuals injured, England only lost about 100 soldiers killed in battle, although thousands would die of disease. But the Spanish, an astonishing 20,000 soldiers, were killed. And at the end of the battle, 67 out of the original 130 ships would make it back to Spain. So the speech at Tilbury. Why were the English so determined to defeat the Spanish in the Armada? Well, on the 9th of August, Elizabeth visited troops on the south coast and she delivered a very rousing speech. She said the following: "I'm resolved in the midst of the heat of the battle to live or die amongst you all. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of the King of England too, and I think foul scorn of Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe that should dare to invade the borders of my realm." This was one of the first times that Elizabeth showed everyone in England, whether they were Catholic or Protestant, that she was on the same side as them. For the first time, it didn't matter which religion you were. What mattered is you were willing to stand up with your queen to fight against the Spanish. Your task to complete is to finish off the Tilbury speech. Now, you'll see 3 points below, point 1, point 2, and 3. Point number 2 is an excerpt from Elizabeth's speech herself, where she said, "I am resolved in the midst of the heat of battle to live and die amongst you all." Your job is to write the introduction. What would she have said before this part of her speech? And to write the concluding paragraph as well. How would she finish this off? On the right-hand side are some tips for you to use. Try to match the language Elizabeth is using and to imitate her vocabulary. Think about how she would introduce this important message and how she would conclude it as well. Keep in mind the audience, who you're saying this to. Keep in mind the purpose, the reason you're saying it, and link to the historical context that you know about the Spanish Armada as well.